My name's Theodore Selden. I am a media services technician, or as I prefer to do on my digital signage, I am the Media Knight. Basically, I've been drawing for as long as I can remember. For whatever reason as a kid, I hated crayons. I still don't know why, but markers, pencils, markers in particular, I always loved the more watery mediums, not so much the dry mediums, though that kind of shifted over time. But I've been drawing like for as long as I can remember, and basically my education was sculpted to follow the interests that I had. So roughly when lockdown was going on, it finally occurred to me that I could use my watercolor painting technique in conjunction with post-production software in order to create this new form of image that I have not seen before. Like, I know it has to exist. I know someone out there is probably doing the same thing right now in a different context. I haven't seen it yet, and I really wanted to play with this idea of making watercolor paintings that were specifically designed to work in tandem with post-production software. And what I'm finding is that the end result is I will make these paintings that are simply not designed to function as individual paintings. Like, they seem to work that way anyway, but because that's not their original intention, it's weird to find all the different people reactions to these paintings that were never meant to be seen as paintings. Going through college, there's only so much information you can import into your brain at once. And there's also, no matter what discipline you get tangled up in, there's always more to learn. There's a lot of stuff I wanted to learn in college that wasn't quite on the syllabus, and most of those things I had to teach myself after the fact. I was swamped in college, so it really wasn't until after I left that I realized I had to start from the ground up in a lot of ways. I was not formally taught how to use After Effects. I would occasionally in college be in a room in a lab with a teacher who knew a few things and could point me in a few directions, show me how to do one or two little things here and there, but it was never a case of here's our After Effects class, here's our After Effects tutorial. It was always a case of off the books, unofficial, I might be shown a tidbit. So after kind of brute forcing my way through a lot of After Effects stuff, I eventually sat down with internet tutorials, and I used those to kind of teach myself the basics from the ground up. The internet tutorial is a fantastic tool for this purpose. It is how I taught myself Premiere from the ground up. When I got my copy of Premiere, Final Cut 7, which had been the primary teaching tool up until that point, was being phased out by Apple. Final Cut X was entering the ecosystem, and very few editors thought this was a good idea. I was one of the editors who hated that software, and I had to relearn it 5 years after it came out. And internet tutorials. I taught myself Final Cut. I taught myself Premiere. I taught myself After Effects. At the moment, I'm currently in the middle of teaching myself Blender. Never stop learning these things. Never stop, whatever tool you're using right now, whatever the hip new video editing tool you're supposed to be using, in 5 years, that's not gonna matter. I want to use it as a motion tracking tool. I want to import my footage into Blender, sculpt a 3D environment, motion track that environment to my footage, and then I will have integrated CG components that I can use to enhance the footage I'm looking for. Now, I am not very good at this. I've only just started. I don't know how to rig characters in preparation for proper animation, but I'm starting to learn those skill sets, and although I don't think they'll be advanced enough for me to use Blender as a tool in the movie I'm trying to make, maybe the next one, if I keep learning Blender in the background, I'll be able to use Blender eventually in that other context. So I spoke a little bit about the watercolors and making them shift their exact color in post-production software, but that experiment I've mostly been doing with PNGs taken off the internet to see what color shifts work. Something I'm going to experiment with, actually creating paper mache sculptures, applying my watercolor to these sculptures, and then I'm going to do the hue shift effect, and I want to see how it works on a physical sculpture that is also interacting with my actors. I'm going to see how far I can push taking this prop and turning it into an ethereal, ghost-like entity. I'm experimenting with a lot of the different art forms being segmented into the 5 classical element system. So watercolor, of course, is water. And charcoal I think of as a fire/earth elemental. Oil paintings I think of as more earthy. And of course, well, you got your, well, they segment out. The digital art form, I can't decide whether that should count as fire or spirit as far as all that's concerned. So there's a few decisions I'm making there about the spirituality of the craft, and that would be the thing I really want to do, to have this movie as a subtext, allow those 5 elements to be represented in an unofficial, narratively uninvolved way. Because each of those 4 frames, I flashed a different color. Each color corresponded to what in, I believe, the Chinese feng shui elemental system, each color would correlate to one of those elements, but only 4. Your earth, fire, water, wind. And then the fact that these 4 frames were on a single timeline, that single timeline becomes spirit, representationally, or akasha for anyone who wants to, who prefers that term. So that was my video spark. A composition, even the 4 pixels, right there, 4 different pixels, 4 different elements, but all within the same composition. So I'm able to spiritually, I'm able to use the video tools to represent a spiritual element of 4 elements, all contained within a 5th element, visual and on the timeline. So that's the kind of thing that I will experiment with, that I will play with as kind of a precursor to how do I get watercolor to substitute the biggest budget Hollywood movie I've ever seen. There are works of narrative fiction that I want to make happen. And because I am a guy from suburban New Jersey without a lot of budget to work with, that turns into a challenge. Because there are stories I want to tell that in order to make sense, there's a level of visual spectacle that needs to exist. And right now, that level of visual spectacle is very affiliated with larger budget Hollywood films. I don't have that kind of budget. What I'm hoping to do is I actually want to create a world. I want to create a very specific visual continuity. And then I want an entire movie to take place within this hyper-stylized, hyper-real environment. And the watercolor post-production technique that I keep talking about, I'm trying to sculpt it into a tool that will allow me to create a very stylized world. The way I plan on pulling this off is some of these softwares have tools that allow you to bathe an entire project in a cartoon-like filter. Now, it doesn't convert everything into a cartoon, but it does simplify a lot of the images around the face or any detail on the human body. And I have enough control that I can start to shift footage into looking like some of my watercolors. Most of these watercolor techniques I'm developing for the explicit purpose of being the basis of special effects for this film.